Hello there, I'm Chuck Todd, and welcome to another episode of Meet the Press Reports. Today, we're looking at gun culture in America, the growing diversity of its membership, and the challenge it creates in passing effective gun safety legislation. America's love affair with guns is so ingrained in the country's hunting and pioneer history that the actual right to a firearm was written into the U.S. Constitution. After a decade of assassinations, gun legislation in 1968 imposed new federal restrictions on who could own a firearm. And the National Rifle Association sprang to life. The NRA was originally formed after the Civil War to simply better educate soldiers on gun safety and accurate shooting. And it's really what the organization was about for a good 50 or so years. But by the 1970s and 80s, the NRA changed, and it became a committed lobbyist for the uninhibited right to a firearm. And it's a political battle that continues to this day. Now, in an era where mass shootings proliferate, the Supreme Court's expansion of gun rights has now widened the debate over who has a right to what when it comes to bearing arms. That expansion came after a pandemic crime wave and fears of political violence, which drove many Americans to gun stores, some for the very first time. So it raises these questions now. Who exactly is part of today's American gun culture? And have lawmakers lost the ability to regulate it? Well, my colleague Cal Perry has more.
I've seen all kinds of gun crimes, and I can tell you, Brian Kemp's new law is dangerous.
American politics in 2022.
Well, if it isn't Big Jim Leonard.
More than 100 Republican ads, 20 from Dems, all centered around guns, giving the perception the issue of guns is divided exclusively along red and blue lines. But in a country with 120 guns for every 100 people, there are liberals who are pro-gun and conservatives who support restrictions. We spoke with 6 gun owners across America, and for each of them, the idea of America's gun culture means something different. Approximately 77 million adults own a gun in the United States. 6 in 10 say their reason for getting one is self-protection. Like Will, who asked to be identified only by his first name. His interest in firearms was renewed during the pandemic.
Part of it was self-protection. There were a lot of, not in the local area, but just surrounding areas. There were a lot of home break-ins and things like that. Car break-ins, so I thought, it might be a good time, especially with my kids getting older. So I wanted to protect my family, protect my house.
There will be people who will see these ARs and will say, these are the things that are destroying America. What do you sort of think when you hear that kind of stuff?
I'm sympathetic to that. I certainly understand, especially for people who have experienced that trauma or that tragedy. I don't take my ARs out and just start flaunting it. My understanding in Maryland, there's no rule against open carry for rifles. But that doesn't mean I should just go around and flaunt it and carry it or let people know, hey, I have it. It's not what it's for me.
In some states, it's legal to openly carry weapons, including rifles, and people do. And in places like Missouri, folks say it's a way of life.
Weapons, guns is a culture out here.
Charles Kay is a recently retired Army officer who's training to be a gunsmith.
A lot of people need to go hunt in order to put food on the table. They grew up, 5, 6, 7-year-olds are learning how to shoot, learning gun safety from their parents and, who else. That's how they grew up. So, yeah, a lot of people have guns around here. That's the culture.
While Charles is skeptical of new gun laws, there are some that he supports.
I wouldn't be opposed to making everything 21. I'm not opposed to all gun transactions, having to go through a federal firearm licensed dealer of some sort.
Never gone hunting. I've barely fished. I enjoy shooting as a hobby. I enjoy shooting paper targets.
James, who also requested his last name not be used, shoots only for sport. As the son of a retired law enforcement officer, many might expect him to be an emphatic supporter of gun rights. But he believes the right to gun ownership must be balanced with responsibility.
A lot of people ask me as soon as they realize that I'm a gun owner, like, oh man, what if somebody breaks into your house? Are you going to use that? And I, sincerely looking deep down into that truthful mirror, I don't think I would. I think it would be very much a matter of call the police. I think a lot of people will get on the campaign, the rallying cry of our rights, our rights, our rights. And I think it would be more helpful for us to also consider the responsibilities attached to that.
Views about guns can vary widely depending on where you are. For example, I'm here right now in suburban Baltimore, and the views here are very different than the views in a place like where I am now, in downtown Baltimore, a place where the murder rate this year is outpacing that of last year.
I realized it was really a stress reliever. Like, I was having kids, like, really coming in there wanting to fight everyone.
Alex Long, a community activist who's lost family members to gun violence, has decided to open a gym to try to lure kids off the streets and away from guns.
And by the time they left, they literally would come to me and like, man, if I wasn't doing this, I'd probably get locked up.
In a city with more than 240 homicides so far this year, guns here are easy to get.
13, 14-year-olds that will have access, and it's deliberate. Like I say, guys will come around here with cars and trucks full of firearms, and the purpose is target our youth. Where are our leaders to tackle this issue? Because these are our kids. These aren't some war-torn country or a bunch of soldiers that have been heavily trained. These are our kids, and we turned our back on them. So that's our fault. You know, so our kids, they felt alone. They feel like they have to do it on their own. And sadly, in a lot of cases, I have to agree with them.
Alex and his partner are both gun owners, and rather than have the government focus on gun restrictions, he'd like to see more funding for programs like his that offer support for those in trouble. He's working to try to prevent the worst.
We got to get back to giving them real support. And it's not that 9-to-5 support. You may have a young man call you 3 o'clock in the morning and say, I want to kill somebody. You got to be open up to actually hear him or her and then work with them so they now hear them and understand that this ain't what I really want to do.
And is that the kind of calls? Those are the kind of calls you get?
Absolutely.
The laws around guns changed dramatically this summer when the Supreme Court struck down a New York state law that restricted a person's right to conceal carry a firearm, making it far easier now to do so. In places like Maryland, it's meant an increase in those wanting to conceal carry.
Since the Supreme Court ruling, an unbelievable explosion of people coming to get gun training.
Catherine Harrison is the president of the Maryland 10th Cavalry Gun Club, where they do more than just fire guns. The club roots its history in the Buffalo Soldier and puts a premium on educating its members about current firearm legislation.
Here in the state of Maryland, you have to have 16 hours of training. So I think most of these instructors have gone from maybe averaging 60 students a month to over 200 plus. What's most important to me, I think, is that gun owners provide or get some level of education to use their firearms, not just go out and buy one and then take it and bring it home, put it on the dresser.
Michelle Douglas, who founded the gun club, has owned a gun for 16 years.
There's a lot of guns in America, too. Is it reasonable to think that we're going to...
You're never going to get rid of the guns off the street. That ship has sailed. It's too late. There's too many guns out here on the street, and there's too many people that don't follow the rules. So lift the restrictions on people like me so we can defend our homes.
Her concern is that more gun laws would impact the wrong people, her.
I'm not the one that the government needs to put restrictions on. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I adhere to the laws. Laws are made to keep honest person honest. It does nothing for the criminals. They don't care.
From Missouri to Maryland, some Americans believe lawmakers are protecting their right to have a gun. Others believe they're letting us down. Michelle worries about politicians stoking divisions, and like many firearms users, wants to be prepared to defend herself in case she's confronted with the violence they speak of so frequently.
One of the things that happens is like Republicans are pro-guns and Democrats are coming for your guns. Now, that may not be true, but that's kind of where... Well, what do you think about all that?
Well, with an ex-president advocating civil violence and disobedience. My concern is, do I have enough bullets at home to defend my castle?
When we come back, can gun legislation truly be effective in a growing gun culture with growing gun rights? Stay with us. More than half of the state legislatures in the country oppose restricting access to guns. Let's break it down. 30 states require neither universal background checks nor licenses to own a gun. The Giffords Law Center, which is a gun safety organization led by the former Congresswoman and a gun violence victim herself, Gabrielle Giffords, has given an F grade on gun laws to 25 of those states, the letter grade of D to Indiana and Ohio, and then C's to Minnesota, Florida, and Wisconsin. The bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which is a gun safety measure signed into law this summer, does not require states to change their licensing requirements, though it does force states to search juvenile criminal records for any problems or red flags for potential buyers who are under the age of 21. The law also prohibits gun trafficking across state lines. It prohibits straw purchasing, which is buying a gun for someone else, and it prohibits those convicted of domestic violence from buying a gun for 5 years. That's that boyfriend loophole you heard about for a while. And finally, this bill enhances penalties for possession of firearms prohibited by prohibited persons. Though Democrats celebrated passage of this first gun safety bill in 30 years, President Biden said more needs to be done.
Assault weapons need to be banned. They were banned. I led the fight in 1994. I'm determined to ban these weapons again and high-capacity magazines that hold 30 rounds and to let mass shooters fire hundreds of bullets in a matter of minutes. I'm not going to stop until we do it.
So joining me now, I've got Congressman Brian Higgins. He's a Democrat from New York whose district includes Buffalo, the site of a recent mass shooting. Marshall Davis is an owner and firearms instructor at My Sister's Keeper Defense. Corey Winfield is site director at Safe Streets Brooklyn in the Baltimore area. And Dr. Alan Lichtman is a professor of history at American University, and he's author of the book, Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. So before we sort of get into the larger debate about guns in America, what are we debating? Are we debating whether everybody should have access to a gun? Are we debating gun safety? Because I feel like the debate continues to change. I'll start with the congressman. Congressman Higgins, what are we debating? What are you really debating in Congress? The rules to buy a gun or who should be able to own one?
Well, no technology advances more quickly in our society than the technology of killing. Every day, new weapons are being made and manipulated to kill more people, more quickly and more completely. We had the Buffalo shooting. We had one shooter with an AR-15 who killed 10 people in a premeditated, pre-planned, racist attack. And the killing lasted for 2 minutes and 3 seconds, 123 seconds. One shooter, 10 people dead, 3 people injured. I think there's a common denominator here, and it's assault weapons that are in the hands of the wrong people. And getting to the core of that will get to the core of the issue of gun violence.
Marshall Davis, how do you define an assault weapon? Because that seems, feels like one of the bigger problems we have is agreeing on which weapons should be classified as what.
I think it's a misnomer. Essentially, when people say something that's an assault weapon, that's like saying an assault knife. You can commit a crime or act of violence with any type of weapon, any tool. But I think what people mean usually when they say assault rifle is AR-15 style or platform rifles. So respond to the congressman there. He believes these things should be, in many ways, if not totally off the streets, which is what I think President Biden is advocating. Should there be different rules for someone who wants to own an AR-15? I would say different rules as in exceptional training. I would say that in that same scenario in the Tops grocery store shooting, what we didn't factor for is that there was a security guard there who did oppose the threat, who did use his handgun against the criminal with a rifle. Imagine if that same security guard had a rifle, had the same equivalent or higher means of self-defense. Not only did he, with his handgun, slow down the shooter, but I believe he saved lives. And I think had he had the same or equivalent weapon, he would have been able to stop the attacker.
Corey, let me ask you what you think the debate should be. Your background, you served time for committing gun violence.
Yes, I have.
And now you're sort of, you tell me what you think the government, how they should be intervening. You're working for a group that's advocating for more nonviolence on the streets. How should the government step in here when it comes to guns?
I think the government should step in and put a cap on exactly what kind of guns should be allowed to be manufactured. Also,
so the number of guns made in a given year or a given amount of time.
Yes, it's entirely too many guns on our streets, and they'll fall in the hands of our young black men in the inner city of America, and we are dying at an alarming rates.
And it's not like they're going to gun stores to buy these guns, right? No. I mean, we had it in the piece. It's just they're almost too available
Chuck,
for certain ages.
I can leave this office right now and come back with a gun.
In how long?
In 10 minutes.
Yeah.
In 10 minutes, literally. But I can't leave this office right now and come back with a cell phone in 10 minutes, right? Because I'm going to need what? ID, identification. They want my social security card. They want all this stuff, right? But so if we know this, then we need to start addressing it properly and stop dancing around the rules and stop.
Right.
And gun violence is costing us $557 billion a year. A year. Each city is paying $1 million for a victim. $1 million. So right now in my city, Baltimore, Maryland, we are well over 250 murders this year. So right now we are in $250 million, and the year is not even over with, and we probably ain't even finished paying the well over $300 million from last year, because we was well over 300 murders. So this is a problem.
Alan, you have a book that says repeal the Second Amendment. Let's put the Second Amendment up. I want to put it up on screen so everybody can see it, because it's a very, it's not a long amendment. It's an amendment of very few words, a lot of commas. And the question is, this phrase, well-regulated militia. Let's just take the two words well-regulated. If the Supreme Court didn't interpret it the way they currently do, we probably could pass laws that would classify guns in certain ways, that would allow for the ID card that he's asking for. But it seems as the way we interpret the the way the courts are interpreting the Second Amendment, legislators are handcuffed, no?
Absolutely, and that's why I talk about the need to repeal the Second Amendment. I understand that's a long shot, but we did repeal the Prohibition Amendment. But more specifically, the idea that the Second Amendment creates an individual right to keep and bear arms is one of the greatest hoaxes in the history of this country. In 1955, the constitutional authority for the National Rifle Association wrote a memo saying the Second Amendment only relates to collective defense through a well-regulated militia. Then, in 1977, the radicals took over the NRA and perpetrated this hoax that it protected an individual right to bear arms. Why not? Here's the history. Of 13 colonies with their own constitutions, the precursor to the amendment, all but one were either silent on firearm rights or linked it to collective defense through a militia. Moreover, who framed the amendment? James Madison, a slaveholder. Who voted for it in Congress in the states? Hundreds of slave owners. Do you think for a moment they would have voted for or ratified an amendment that gave black people an unlimited right to keep and bear arms? Of course not. But by linking it to a well-regulated militia, they kept arms out of the hands of black persons because they were barred from the militia.
Brian Higgins, the Second Amendment, what would pass in Congress if it wasn't for the current court's interpretation of the Second Amendment?
I'm not certain, but I think we need to do a better job in identifying the problem. Robb Elementary School, Uvalde, Texas. One shooter. The shooting started and stopped in room 111 and 112 in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. One shooter, 21 people dead, including 19 kids. Sandy Hook Elementary School, Newtown, Connecticut, December 2012. The shooting started at 9:35 in the morning, was completed at 9:40. 5 minutes, 26 people on campus dead, including 20 kids between the ages of 5 and 7. Their autopsy showed that many of those kids had 3 and 4 bullet wounds in them. There's the common denominator. It's young people who are not mentally healthy. In the Buffalo case, the shooter was 18. The Uvalde case, the shooter was 18. Sandy Hook, he was 20. But they have had a history of mental problems, and they're all possessing the same gun, which is designed and manipulated every day to kill more people more quickly and more completely.
Marshall, how would you respond? Look, you're a gun owner, and you're an advocate for gun ownership, but I'm guessing you're an advocate for responsible gun ownership.
Absolutely.
So where are you comfortable the government stepping in and deciding, look, you have certain rights for this level of weapon, but, hey, the same reason you have to get a commercial driver's license to drive a semi, you should have a different license to operate an AR-15.
I don't disagree with education and training. I don't disagree with mental health programs. I don't disagree with a lot of the things that are being proposed. I think that we put the focus on the tool instead of the people. Not all people are committing mass shootings. You don't see Black women committing mass shootings. You don't see Hispanic women or, indigenous men and women committing mass shootings. There's a specific demographic of people who are committing these crimes. So I think we should focus on why. Why do these specific demographic of people have such a disdain for human life, and why are they using these tools to hurt people?
But how would you respond to say, but shouldn't we make access to this a little bit harder?
I think changing access is fine. Having age limits, that's something that was proposed.
21, raising to 21.
I think that's fine. That's not an issue. But still, if those same people are intent on hurting people and causing loss of life, they will find a way to cause loss of life. So we need to figure out how can we change the person and the mentality also, in addition to everything else that's proposed.
Alan, you're shaking your head. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm fundamentally shaking my head. Look, as horrific as mass shootings are, they are the tip of the iceberg of gun violence in America. 15,000 gun homicides a year, 40,000 gun violence, and we have the evidence showing that gun controls work. You talked about the Giffords Law Center. The 5 states with the tightest gun controls, according to the Giffords Law Center, had a firearms homicide rate, it's in my book, of 2.4 per 100,000. The 5 states with the loosest laws had a tripled rate of 6.3 per 100,000. Look at gun deaths. 5.1 per 100,000 for the 5 strictest states, 18.2 for the 5 loosest states. I also looked into this proper cause gun permits that the Supreme Court just struck down. The half a dozen states with those laws had a gun death rate of 6.3 per 100,000. All the other states were 16.3. Gun controls work. The proof is in the data.
Corey, would you say this with these young men that are looking for weapons, and they may come back at you and say, if I don't have one, how am I going to protect myself? I'm getting one because I got to protect myself. Is there any amount of training or awareness that would change that mindset?
The only thing that would change that mindset is not to have the gun itself. Right now, our young men, like I said earlier, is dying. It's wars that's going on in our inner city. And we're not paying attention to it, or we're just playing a blind eye to it, or we just frankly don't give a damn. And let's call it like it is, right? If we want to really get to the issue and the core, I mean, I don't care about any of them, any stats, anything like that. That's because we still dying. Right now, somebody's being shot. Right now.
Right.
Somewhere in America, somebody's being shot. Might be in my city when I get back, right? So all that can go right out the window. Because you got to stand in front of grandmother, when you got to stand in front of mother and say, I'm sorry that your 6-year-old was hit by a straight bullet that's leaving out of school, and we're going to get to the bottom of that, that's bull crap.
But my question is, so if the criminals, the people who are committing these murders have these weapons, right, what do you propose people do to defend themselves? Do they say, hey, I voted in support of gun control, hey, I called the police? What do they do to defend their lives in that moment?
Well, what I'm saying to you is that it's our people are going at each other.
I agree.
Right?
I think
so.
it should be happening.
So what's happening is, right, that white people and people like yourself, right, are not in our inner cities fighting and pulling guns on each other, right? I walk down the street every day. We are killing each other about nothing, nonsense, right? So what we need to do is really put our money and our energy in intervention programs to stop this kind of stuff, right? Put our money in the school system to educate our kids so they can be better and comprehensive thinking of not doing this.
I agree with all that. So my question was, what do you say to someone who wants to defend themselves? If they live in a neighborhood where this crime is happening, what do they do?
There's an answer.
What is the answer?
The answer is proper cause gun permit laws which save lives. The states that don't have it, their gun deaths are more than triple. If you really need self-defense, you can get it. Moreover, the data shows that as compared to gun homicides, the use of guns for self-defense is minuscule. And most murders are not committed by criminals. They're committed by ordinary people who have guns when arguments and fights escalate and become deadly.
Brian Higgins, you've been listening to this conversation, and I'd love for you to respond particularly to what Marshall was talking about, which is capping the number of guns we have in America, limiting the availability of the manufacturing of guns to a certain number. You know, how much do gun manufacturers play a role here?
Well, they play a big role in this. There's 330 million people in America. There's 400 million guns, and there's 41 million assault weapons. Obviously, if you look at all the mass shootings of late, it's typically carried out by one individual with a AR-15 that kills a lot of people very quickly and completely. So obviously there's a problem. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has identified gun violence as the leading cause of death for children in America today. We have had 518 mass shootings this year in America alone. Obviously, you know, negotiating down bills to combat gun violence is not helpful. It may help in the margins, but what we really need to do is look at the facts and who's carrying out these shootings and what is their weapon of choice. It's obviously multifaceted. There's a social media issue. There's a mental health issue. But there is also a gun issue, and to suggest that there is not is to ignore the problem altogether.
But it sounds like, I'll be honest, even though there's been some disagreement, there seems some agreement in figuring out how we can cut down on gun violence.
Absolutely.
We're just
the data is clear.
Yeah. The problem may simply be the Supreme Court is tying the hands of anybody to try to do something.
Through a misinterpretation of the Second Amendment.
It may be
even
that.
The most conservative judge, Judge Posner, the most cited jurist of the 20th century, said Justice Scalia in that 2010 decision read his own values into the Constitution.
So right now, the Senate has in front of them the Break the Cycle of Violence Act. They need to sign that bill.
And you're talking about actual interventions and helping kids before they start turning to violence.
That's the answer to your question.
And it has to be national.
How do you
skip across state lines?
How do you defend? How do you help yourself? How do you defend from gun violence?
So in that moment,
you stop it before it happens.
Okay,
exactly.
So in that moment also, we have to think about how we can defend ourselves. I'm a survivor of sexual assault and domestic violence. I'm also a survivor of a home invasion. So in those moments, you saying, let's go back in history, let's go back in time, or go forward in time and change the thought process of these criminals does not help me in that moment. What helped me in that moment is being able to defend myself.
What will help you in that moment is knowing that if I'm educated myself of knowing how to get out. I'm a survivor of gun violence. I've been in front of the gun and behind the gun. So I understand how to get out of this. And how we're going to get out of this is we have to help each other. And the Senate has to sign that bill.
Put a little perspective
on this. They have to sign that bill.
I'm going to land this plane, Alan. I appreciate it. I think we've given a lot of perspective.
Okay.
I think this has been exactly the conversation I was hoping to have, because it's about surfacing this tension a little bit and surfacing these issues that we've got to figure out how to solve. You guys were terrific. Thank you all for this. Next time on Meet the Press Reports, 10 years ago, the bitterly fought recall of Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker foreshadowed the widening gulf between the two parties that would come to define American politics today. I'm going to travel to Wisconsin to report on the political dynamics that make the state ground zero for our country's polarization, and which could determine which party controls Congress in the coming elections. I'll see you next time on Meet the Press Reports and this Sunday on Meet the Press.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.